chapters 15 and 16 tonight. Be turning over there in your Bibles. As you do, we're going to start with a question. I'm actually going to change it up just a little bit than what we have written down here. Thought a little bit of a different question. Might be a little bit more appropriate. But the question I want to start with tonight is it wrong to seek power and positions and recognition among men?
Is it wrong to seek or to have? Is there a difference there?
No, not a difference. Not a trick question.
No, I don't think it's wrong to have. Somebody has to be in positions of authority and power.
Okay, so
What's your purpose behind it would be the better question.
Yeah.
That would be your motive would be whether it's wrong or not.
yeah, I think that's really the correct idea and answer. It really depends on what our motive is, right? You know, why do we want power? Why do we want men to recognize us? Why do we want a certain position within the world? Unfortunately, when we think about a lot of time positions of power and recognition, why do most people want them?
Status.
Would you say their motive is selfish in nature?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, generally speaking, there's probably exceptions to every statement, but generally speaking, that is, I think, the case. Sometimes great positions are sought because there's a lot of money involved with them. We can seek positions and power and recognition for the wrong reasons. And the reason that I bring that up, because tonight we're going to study about Moses, who obviously was a leader. He was a man who was recognized, a man of position and a man of power. And then we're going to read about some other guys who wanted to be like Moses. They wanted to be recognized by the people, and they wanted to have a position of power and authority. And so the difference between the two, between the right and the wrong, is going to be that of the motive behind it. And so, generally speaking, if a person is going to be a good leader, should they be selfish in nature? Why should they seek the position of leadership?
Well, the ideal is for our politicians who want to become politicians to help those they live with, their community, the places where they live, the state where they live.
Yeah. So if the motive, if a person is serving, just like Adam brought up, in the eyes of the public, if the motive behind it isn't for the greater good of society, then what's going to happen?
Some don't get the kind of leader that should be, so therefore they won't get the job done that is going to benefit the people whom they're charged with protecting and taking care of.
Yeah, they're going to make choices based upon how it benefits them if they're not out to serve the people, right? And so, you think about our society today, and obviously there's good things that happen within our society, and there's bad things too. But a lot of the problems that exist in our society are, I think, because people in the world today are so selfishly motivated. If we were all out here as we went about our daily lives, looking out for the good of everybody else, do you think our society would function a lot different than it does today? But the bottom line is, those in positions, power and recognition, they have to seek to serve the people. Moses was a great leader because of that. I mean, when you study him, he wasn't in it for the recognition. He wasn't in it for the power. He was in it to help the people. Not every leader of Israel you can say that about. Okay, let's go to Numbers chapter 15 here. We got 2 chapters to cover tonight, so obviously we're not going to read all of it. The first 12 verses basically deal with some laws that God gave concerning the grain offering and the drink offering. Now, remember, we've just finished studying how the children of Israel were supposed to go up to the promised land. They refused to do that. Because of that, God punished them, or gave them their punishment, which was to wander 40 years in the wilderness. But he said, your children are going to inherit this land. And when they inherit this land, keep in mind, would they have any fields right now? Do they have any vineyards or anything they were taking care of? No, they were out here in the middle of the wilderness, right? But God's promised them, your children are going to inherit this land, and when they inherit this land, here's the laws that they're going to have to follow when it comes to the grain offering and the drink offering. And so basically those offerings, you'll read about them, they had to do with the idea of thanksgiving, recognition that the things you had came from God, being thankful for that, and then the idea of dedicating the things that God has given them, dedicating them to God, giving back the best and the first fruits. And so let's go down to verse 13 here, and somebody go ahead and read verses 13 through 16 for us here. We're in Numbers chapter 15, verses 13 through 16.
All who are native born shall do these things in this manner, in presenting an offering made by a fire, a sweet aroma to the Lord. And if a stranger dwells with you, or whoever is among you throughout your generations, and would present an offering made by a fire, a sweet aroma to the Lord, just as you do, so shall he do. One ordinance shall be for you of the assembly and of the stranger who dwells with you, an ordinance forever throughout your generations. As you are, so shall the stranger be before the Lord. One law and one custom shall be for you and for the stranger who dwells with you.
Okay, so question number 2 on your handout. Did God's laws, these laws that he's giving here, do they apply both to the Israelite and to the foreigner alike? Yeah. Those people, now understand, of course, this wasn't a law that was given outside the nation of Israel, but a lot of times you'll read about people who came in from other nations and dwelt there in Israel. And so if you were going to live among God's people, you had to follow God's law. It didn't matter if you were a native-born Israelite, if you were a natural physical descendant of Jacob and of Abraham, or if you were a person who'd come in from another country. You were expected to abide by God's law. And so everybody had to follow the same rules. If you'll notice, he also talks about not only were they to do this in the then and there, but if you notice in verse 15, it says, this shall be an ordinance forever throughout your generations. And so this law not only applied to that present generation, but it was going to apply to all the future generations too. And so you have this setting and this idea, and it's going to be important as we read the rest of this chapter here, but all are equal in the sight of God. Does God show partiality towards certain men? Now, does he require certain men to do these things, and then the other guys he says, no, you don't worry, you don't have to do that? Does he require the same thing of all of us? Yeah, generally speaking, the specifics, the talents may be a little bit different, but generally speaking, yes. God requires the same thing of everybody. And so one person doesn't have one set of laws that they live under, and then another person has another set of laws that they live under. They were universal in nature. And then we read about, in the next few verses, you read about some more offerings. And then as you get into verses 22 through 29, you'll read about some of the laws concerning unintentional sin. And so question number 3, we're not going to read those verses. You can kind of skim through them here while I'm blabbing if you want to get an idea. But what were the instructions? Now remember, these are instructions that apply all across the board. But how would you summarize the general instructions for unintentional sins? What was required? First of all, let's say who could commit unintentional sin?
Well, it would seem anyone could.
Yeah, and there's really 2 situations that are outlined in these verses. First of all, it's a group. When a group acts as one person, when they're united in mind and purpose, and they go a certain direction, but they violated God's law. And so as a group, they become guilty of this sin. And then you have the idea of course, individuals who on their own may have done something and violated God's law. So in those instances, whether it was as a community or as an individual, not necessarily the specific sacrifices, but what was God's general law? What did a person have to do to be forgiven?
Atonement.
Blood.
Yeah, sacrifice had to be made, didn't it? You know, we kind of talked about a couple of weeks ago, sin is sin. It doesn't matter, you know, if it's unintentional or not, it's still a violating of God's law. And so in order to make sin right in the sight of God, a sacrifice has to be made. It's not the case that, you know, if a person unintentionally violated God's law, that there was less of a sacrifice that was required of them. Certainly the attitude when a person violates God's law is important, as we'll figure out or read a little bit as we go on here. But the sacrifice was the same. So if a person wanted to be forgiven of sins, what had to happen? Yeah, sacrifice. Blood had to be shed, didn't it? Didn't matter what kind of sin it was, what violation of God's law. Let's read, somebody read verses 30, again we're in Numbers 15 here, verses 30 through 36 for us, please.
But the soul that doeth aught presumably presumptuously, whether he be born in the land or a stranger, the same reproacheth the Lord, and that soul shall be cut off from among his people, because he hath despised the word of the Lord, and hath broken his commandment, that the soul shall utterly be cut off. His iniquity shall be upon him. And while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man that gathered sticks upon the Sabbath day. And they that found him gathering sticks brought him unto Moses and Aaron, and unto all the congregation. And they put him in ward, because it was not declared what should be done to him. And the Lord said unto Moses, the man shall be surely put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones without the camp. And all the congregation brought him without the camp, and stoned him with stones, and he died, as the Lord commanded Moses.
Okay, so question number 4 here. What did somebody have to do in order to be cut off from the Israelite people? What if you sinned unintentionally? Were you cut off? You better shake your head like this. No. But what kind of sin did a person have to commit before they were cut off?
One that they knew better to do, and went ahead and done it anyway.
Yeah. So, how did the King James Version translate that one? Despised. Okay. So, New King James Version says in verse 30 there, presumptuously, and of course the idea is, you know, it's the attitude that a person has whenever they violate God's law, and basically it's this idea of, I don't care what God says, I'm going to do what I want to do. It's the idea of being defiant of God's law, brazenly going out and openly breaking God's law without any care, without any regret about it. Another way we might say is deliberately sinning. You know, a person has purpose that they're going to go out here and break God's law. And so in those instances, that person was to be cut off. Basically, I think the original meaning of the word is with a high hand, which, you know, kind of means this idea God's trying to speak to you, and you just hold your hand up and say, listen, that's enough, you know. I don't care. I'm not going to listen to what you say. I'm not going to do. Whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to go out here and do whatever I want to do. And so you have the idea here of, you know, kind of flaunting openly your sin. And what would to happen to a person if they did that? Yeah, they were cut off, and of course, it's pretty easy to figure out what that means from the context here. It means they were to be put to death, weren't they? If they were going to openly defy God's law, living in this society that was supposed to function under God's law, then death was the penalty that was to come to them. Yes, sir?
What do you think that did for the stick picking on Saturday?
Well, it probably lessened it, I would say, wouldn't you?
It made the rock picking on Sunday.
Wouldn't, but if you knew the law, wouldn't that be about every sin? I mean, if you knew better and you sinned, like we know the law, when we sin, we went against the law. I mean, it's not that I didn't know it.
Yeah,
At that moment in time, I chose to not do it or to do it.
yeah.
But if we had consequences like that, you think that would be the church?
Yeah, well, it certainly helped. I mean, you think about the principle, and really, I think that's what we're aiming at here. You know, a person who knows God's law, and the example that we have is this man on the Sabbath day. Okay, God told children of Israel, don't do any work on the Sabbath day. This guy care about that law? Nah. He said, I don't care what God says. I'm going to go and work on the Sabbath day. You guys can all sit at home if you want. But I'm going to go out here and I'm going to do what I want to do. And so I think it's more of an attitude of a defiance of God's law. You know, and it's just more of an attitude, I think, where a person says, God, you're not going to tell me what to do. You know, your laws aren't going to be what directs my life and determines my focus in my actions and words here upon this earth. Yes, sir.
It says all the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp.
It does. Yes, sir.
Are we talking about the 2 to 4 million people?
Well, I would say they had some representatives. I don't think it was.
So they had some stones?
Yeah, I would say they had some specific representatives from each tribe, but
Would that be the 70?
yeah, you wouldn't want to be standing in the front of the crowd if everybody was throwing a stone, would you? But it's the difference between the two, again, is, you know, as a Christian, do we violate God's law? Yeah. Do we know better? Yeah. Are we going to keep on doing that the rest of our life? Is that our goal? Is that our mindset? No. I think it's just a tremendously different mindset, you know, versus the guy who deliberately and defiantly goes out here and says, I don't care what God's law says, I'm just going to do whatever I want to do. But certainly, you know, the provisions were made under the law of Moses for a person who acted like that. He was to be put out of the land. I mean, what can you do for a person like that? You know, if you move into this nation, well, even if you weren't a foreigner like this person, if you just moved in, or you were born there, but yet you were going to say, I'm not going to follow the laws. Now remember, these aren't just religious laws. I mean, these are governmental laws that Israel is living under. It's basically the law of the land, isn't it? So if you're going to defy the laws of the land and say, I'm not going to live under them, I mean, what can you do? There's nothing you can do for that person. Something had to be done drastically to make an example of them. And so, unfortunately, the guy who sinned with the high hand was severely punished for it. So, question 5 here: who did not observe the Lord's command? Well, it was the man who defiantly and deliberately. He had it in his heart and his mind. I'm going to go out here and I'm going to break the Sabbath law. And that's what he did. And so, how was he punished? Several things were done to him. Question 6 here. Ultimately, he died. We got that. Danny's got the stoning part down. Well, what else happened to him? What happened to him first?
Put him in jail.
Yeah, he was arrested. He was put into prison. God was consulted. He was sentenced to death. And then, of course, he was stoned to death. Let's read the end of the chapter here. Somebody read verses 37 through 41.
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speaking to the children of Israel, bid them that they make them fringes in the borders of their garments throughout their generations, and that they put upon the fringe of their borders a ribbon of blue. And it shall be unto you for a fringe, that ye may look upon it, and remember all the commandments of the Lord, and do them. And that ye seek not after your own heart and your own eyes, after which ye used to go a-whoring, that ye may remember and do all my commandments, and be holy unto your God. I am the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt, to be your God. I am the Lord your God.
Okay, so God gives them a law after this happens, and what does he tell them to do with their garments?
I'm having trouble picturing it, but a fringe of borders of blue.
Yeah. So basically, on the bottom of their garments, they were supposed to, we'd probably call them a tassel or something like that. They were to make these tassels and take a blue piece of thread or blue piece of cord put it through those tassels, and then fasten those tassels to the bottom of their garments. And what was the purpose for that? Question number 8 here. There's really two themes that I think he emphasizes here in these verses. What was one of them?
Remember all the commandments of Jesus?
Yeah, so it was supposed to be a reminder, right, of all of God's commandments, and their job was to, remember what God said, and then to keep those commandments that He had given. And then what's the second kind of sub-purpose that's stated here?
Seek not after your own heart and your own eyes.
Yeah, so it's a reminder to follow God's laws and not do things your own way. And that's basically what that guy was doing on the Sabbath day, wasn't it? He was just ignoring God's law, and he's out here and he's going to live the way that he wanted to live. How do you think tassels would remind him of that?
I would be annoyed if I had something dangling off me.
Yeah, I would too. I mean, those tassels on the bottom of your garment would constantly be flapping around. I mean, they'd be making noise. You'd be catching stuff with them. I mean, it's just in their, during their daily activities, just kind of a reminder from time to time to track their attention down to them. When they saw those things, they were supposed to remember. As I go about my daily activities, I need to remember God's law. I need to do everything that God commanded me to do. I can't be following my own heart and my own eyes. And so God gives them those tassels as a reminder to do that. All right, in chapter 16, we're going to read about a rebellion that comes against Moses. Somebody got several verses here that I want to read. Somebody read the first 14 verses for us here in Numbers 16. You want me to divide it in half? Okay, Scott's going to do it.
Get my Bible far enough for you. Now Korah the son of Ishar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took men. And they rose up before Moses, which certain of the children of Israel, 250 princes of the assembly, famous in the congregation, men of renown. And they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron, and said unto them, Ye take too much upon you, seeing all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Wherefore then lift up yourselves above the congregation of the Lord. And when Moses heard it, he fell upon his face. He spake unto Korah and unto all his company, saying, Even tomorrow the Lord will show who are his, and who is holy, and will cause him to come near unto him. Even him whom he hath chosen will be caused to come near unto him. This do, take you censers, Korah and all his company, and put fire therein, and put incense in them before the Lord tomorrow. And it shall be that the man whom the Lord doth choose, he shall be holy. Ye take too much upon you, ye sons of Levi. Moses said unto Korah, Hear, I pray you, ye sons of Levi. Seemeth it but a small thing unto you, that the God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel, to bring you near to himself to do the service of the tabernacle of the Lord, to stand before the congregation to minister unto them. And he hath brought thee near to him, and all thy brethren, the sons of Levi, with thee, and seek ye the priesthood also. For which cause both thou and all thy company are gathered together against the Lord. And what is Aaron, that ye murmur against him? How far do you want me to go?
14, please.
And Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, which said, We will not come up. Is it a small thing that thou hast brought us up out of the land that floweth with milk and honey, to kill us in the wilderness, except thou make thyself altogether a prince over us? Moreover, thou hast not brought us into a land that floweth with milk and honey, or given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Wilt thou put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up.
Okay, so we're reading about a rebellion that took place against God's chosen leader, Moses, and also Aaron, the high priesthood itself. And who are these men? Yeah, So there's of course several ways that the Bible describes them here, but some of them were from the tribe of Levi, and specifically what family? Family's mentioned here. Kohath. Does anybody remember what the job of the sons of Kohath were? Remember, all the Levites involved something with the tabernacle. Their job was to do something there.
Is that the carriers?
Yeah, they were the guys who were responsible for transporting all the objects that were used within the tabernacle and all the utensils that went along with them. And so here are people, important people that are familiar with the tabernacle, people that are involved with the tabernacle itself, and they're rebelling against Moses and against Aaron. And what was their complaint?
Why are you in charge?
Yeah, everybody's, you look out here, they're saying we're all God's people, right? So what makes you so important? Who's put you in charge? Why do you get to tell everybody what to do? Because all of us are God's people. So not only were they complaining about Moses, and of course, why would they be complaining about Moses?
He's the guy.
Yeah, they just got punished, didn't they? Remember? They just got told by Moses, you're going to wander 40 years in the wilderness, and all you guys are going to die out here, and then your children are going to be the ones that get to go into the promised land. And so they say, we don't want you to be our leader anymore, okay? You're taking it too much upon yourself. They were sons of Kohath. They were Levites. 3 of them are from the tribe of Reuben. What significance is that? Anybody know? Well, Reuben was the firstborn of Israel. And so generally the firstborn was kind of the leader. But all of them, in all, how many people are we talking about here? Yeah, about 250, and all of them were well-known men. They weren't just your average Joe out here on the street that decided, well, we need to get Moses out of here and replace him with a new leader. So they were well-known within the community. They were respected men. So how does Moses respond to that? You have this group of people who comes to him and basically threatens to remove him from his position of leadership. What does he do?
He amazes me. This is the same thing we studied with his sister Aaron. His humility or meekness, that baffles me. I wish I could do that.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah. We of course talked about a couple weeks ago, Numbers 12. Moses was very meek. He was the meekest person alive on the face of the earth. And can you imagine what would happen today if, you basically have this crowd or this revolt, marching up to the leadership and saying, we need you removed. I mean, Moses falls on his face and bows before him. And he pleads with them, he tries to reason with them to start with. Understand what's going on here. Moses, I think I'm safe in saying this, but I think Moses would have been all right without being the leader of the children of Israel. I think he would have been okay with that. He wasn't seeking that position for power or recognition of men. When the people sin and time again, God's going to destroy them, what does Moses do? Steps in and intercedes, doesn't he? He tries to get God to spare their lives over and over again. And so he fell down upon his face. I don't know how long he stayed there. The Bible doesn't state that. But again, I'm like Adam. It's amazing when you read about his humility. He doesn't lash out in any way. He doesn't retaliate in any way. But the first reaction is to try to get them to come to reason and to understand, I'm not trying to lord over you guys here. I'm just trying to do what God wants us to do. So what does Moses tell Korah and all these followers to do? He kind of poses a challenge to them, doesn't he? What was that challenge?
Put fire in their sensors and God will choose them tomorrow.
Yeah, so basically he's saying, it's a test of fire. Everybody get your censer here. And remember Nadab and Abihu, what happened to them whenever they did something wrong with the censer and worship to God. Yeah, fire went out from the Lord and devoured them, right? And so he says, here's what we're going to do. Here's a challenge. We'll let God decide. Everybody tomorrow, everybody's going to take their censer. Everybody's going to take it and offer it in worship unto God, and God's going to reveal those who are His. God's going to show who's supposed to be in charge and who we should listen to. What does Moses, question 12 here on your handout, what does Moses tell the Levites, or who did he tell they were really opposing? Yeah, when you think about it, you know, they weren't just opposing Moses or Aaron. They were opposing the Lord Himself, because God had decided Moses was going to be the leader. Aaron was going to be the high priest. The Kohathites, they were going to take care of the instruments, the transportation of the instruments in the tabernacle. So basically, they're saying, we don't like your choice here. You know, we don't like what you did. We think you got it mixed up here. We think you got it wrong. So Moses is trying to get them to understand they're opposing God Himself. He tries to get Dathan and Abiram, two men that were mentioned there, to come too. What happens whenever he tries to get them to come? Yeah, and a little bit more than that, they didn't graciously decline, did they? How would you describe their response?
They were insulting to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty arrogant, wasn't it? They said, you go tell us what to do? You know, you're not our boss. We're not going to listen to you. You don't control us. You're not in charge of us. And so, terrible fate's going to wait them. We're not going to read all the rest of the chapter, obviously, because we're about time out of here. But if you notice in question 14, so how does God punish those who oppose Moses? Two things happen. First of all, what happens to Korah and Dathan and Abiram? Yeah. Of course, they wouldn't come to Moses. Moses has to come to Dathan and Abiram, and Kohath, or Korah is there along with them. And as Moses stands before his tent, he says, these guys live and die a natural death. You'll know they're correct in what they've done. But if something happens that you've never seen before, if the earth opens up and swallows them and all their families and their tents and all their possessions, then you'll know that they're in the wrong. Well, that's, long story short, that's exactly what happened. And so it was a clear sign that they were in the wrong in trying to oppose Moses and remove Aaron from the high priesthood. Also, what else happened to the rest of the men? Yeah, those didn't get swallowed up by the earth. Fire came out from God, just like it did with Nadab and Abihu, and devoured these men and punished them. And so we read about a plague also that comes upon the people of God, because the very next day, what happens? Notice verse 41 there. Can you imagine that? You just seen the earth open up and swallow, 3 of these guys and their families who rebelled against God. The others, you saw God strike them dead with fire. And the very next day, people are out here and saying, coming before Moses and Aaron, said, you guys killed God's people. So you can kind of understand, God's lack of patience with this group of people. He sends a plague among them, a rapid spreading plague. People start dropping like flies. Aaron runs in and stays the plague, but 14,700 people die in that plague. So that's chapter 16. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments or questions or anything before we end?
Don't you think they were blinded and were distraught by not getting to go into the promised land? Because they had seen God, they knew Him by this point. They knew what was up, and they did it anyway. I think they were just blinded by disappointment and anger that they weren't getting to go in.
Yeah. Certainly if they had to do it over again, they would have done it differently. But that's the bad thing about choices we make in life. We don't get redos in them. Anybody else?